Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the Left of Greg podcast. As most of you know, my name is Brian Marin, and as always, I will be joined by Greg Williams. If you're new to the show, you can find more information about us in the episode details. Today, we're going to be talking about mass shooting events and specifically school shootings through the lenses of human behavior pattern recognition and analysis. We are doing this in order to explain as best we can how and why these events occur in the first place, how and why we react the way that we do, and how and why we think the right training can prevent the next school attack. Greg and I are experts on human behavior, not on school shootings. Greg and I are experts in pattern recognition, not on partisan politics. Greg and I have a deep fundamental understanding of how to build and implement training and education programs that are specifically designed to determine a person's likely intent. And we have a long history of creating a very real left of bang culture at many organizations. So for this three-part series, we'll be using a different format than our typical episodes. Think of this as more of a guided discussion rather than a conversation we would have while driving to the airport. Our goal with this discussion is to allow anyone who listens to have a better understanding of these events so they can make a more informed decision about how to solve this problem at a local level. For the first chapter in the series, we're going to start by addressing how and why school shootings occur. And to start off the discussion, Greg, I think it's important to understand two things up front. Number one, school shootings or these attacks have been around for a very long time. So this is not a new phenomenon at all. Number two, these are the most preventable attacks that Greg and I have ever studied. So if you want to get the most out of this episode, I would suggest sitting down with the yellow pad and write down some of the concepts that we discussed so that you can personalize this episode to your specific situation or reach out to us with specific questions. We would love to answer them. So on that, Greg, we're going to go ahead and start. And I think it's also important up front to just address, let's briefly talk about rhetoric.
Yeah. So rhetoric, most of what we hear or see on social media or on the news is rhetoric. We have the impressively dressed talking heads that are using language designed to have a persuasive effect, but they lack meaningful content. What I mean by that is that they're being insincere, but they're either misinformed or acting on dated information or commenting too soon when the information hasn't even come in, Brian, and therefore the content that you're getting is not necessarily meaningful to the event.
Okay, well, can that rhetoric be helpful, though, during times like this?
Yeah, so I would say to you, can it be helpful, comma, can it be harmful? And you know, in these incidents, it's generally harmful because rhetoric serves no sound purpose other than getting us angered, saber rattling, making us take sides, vilifying somebody that was at the scene. Listen, that's like promoting a movie, you know, a Hollywood film, rather than sitting there saying, hey, listen, these events happen. Please stay out of the area. Let's wait till calm heads prevail to tell you the story. But hug your child today and keep an eye on your school. Do you understand what I'm trying to say, Brian? I'm trying to say that they'll engage in this meaningless banter rather than having some substantive discussion.
And I agree with that. And I think what happens is I think it's one of the ways to describe it. It's a term is, you know, we're going to need for us to tilt at windmills in order to feel better about something, right? So maybe I don't fully understand something. I'm upset, I'm angry, which everyone has every single right to be. And then so we need to pick a villain. We need to pick someone to go after. So with this most recent one, maybe that's the police. Maybe it's the shooter. Maybe it's some politician for some reason. So we all tend to sort of focus or pick on something that we think we can address or we understand, and that has to be the issue.
Spot on. So what happens, Brian? We have to have a way psychologically, sociologically, physiologically. We have to have a way to channel our fear. Okay, so we got a couple of things that are coming out when we see these reports. We got fear because we personalize it. We think of our own children. We think of the kid that is at school right now. And my God, I'm at work trusting the school to take care of them. And we could go down that line. But then you also have the anger. How could somebody do this? And because we don't fully understand it, you know, we don't fully understand the gas bubbles from the mulch that's under Loch Ness. So we turn them into the Loch Ness monster, Brian, and it becomes more and more vivid. You know what I'm saying? That those lights, the lights in you know, whatever that place is in Texas, you know, that come off in the distance can't be some sort of electric ball of energy that's naturally formed. It must be some sinister motivation. So the problem with rhetoric and the reason I think that you decided to go very laser focused in this episode is so we say, okay, what do we know? And what can we do with the information that we know? And move the ball forward, Brian, rather than keep going back to this place of hate, death, and fear.
Right. And that's a great point. We talk about that a lot of time when you're not making good decisions, if you're basing them on fear.
Yep.
We naturally, all humans fear things they don't understand. We have to make some sort of comparison to something we know, even though it might be completely illogical and have nothing to do with it. But it's a comparison. So on that kind of note, can you give me another example of that, but not having to do with school shootings?
Yeah. So and that's, I think, the key. So meaning that the more we understand how events are formed, the better armed we'll be against fixing them. So let me take you back to when Shelly and I are the owners of the Powderhorn Guest Ranch, and we're leading out all these adventures. Even though we're training and teaching combat hunter at the time, we've got a full slate, right? Well, it happens to be after September 11th, but it's some of the worst wildfires in Colorado history. So Colorado is burning down. The absolute fire ban is everywhere. So Shell and I have a semi-marked Hinsdale County police vehicle, and when we're not actively engaged in fly fishing or taking horse tours or something, we're scanning the area of southern Gunnison County and northern Hinsdale County to make sure that nobody is violating the fire ban. We drive down to a recreation area that's not far from the ranch before you get to the primitive wilderness, and here's a bunch of campers and fishermen, and right in the center they've got a big campfire and they're all cooking their fish. Now, Brian, this has been televised. It's on every poster. It's shown on the sign. You know, you're from California.
California.
You know how much money they spend into saying no. Okay, and we pull up, and these people are incredulous. We're going like, first of all, you know, there's a huge ban on a fire. Second of all, there's a huge fine associated with it. This is a criminally negligent act. We could take you to jail. You got to put the fire out immediately. And a guy looks at me straight in the face, Brian, and says, hey, this is my only vacation with the kids. We just caught a fresh trout out of the stream. Are you telling me I can't cook my fish? And it's like, okay, so what you just described of having an argument, but the argument doesn't actually fit the logic of the scene, he was willing to adjust the way he thought to accept the idea that he wasn't doing anything wrong, so he could get his kids fish. Now, don't we do that the same thing with swimming? Every year we take our kids, spring opens up, we get excited, we want to go to the beach, we want to go swimming. And instead of taking a knee and saying stuff like, how many times do you and I tell people before you go to a restaurant, rehearse a Heimlich maneuver? Why? Because it's the smart thing to do, Brian. You're very likely to get into a situation where you or somebody at the restaurant might choke. But what do? We don't. We conflate those with other things that are never going to happen to us. We're never going to have to jump in and save a kid with a cramp that's going to drown swimming. But what happens every spring, Brian? We see it over and over again. And so rhetoric on the news doesn't help that. What would help is a cogent response, a message. Hey, listen, before you go out today, you know, at the end of the weather, before you go out today, remember, a lot of kids every year drown during this period because they're not prepared to get into the water. You get what I'm saying?
And those
be more efficient.
Those are preventative, low-calorie things that you can do. And it's even now, you know, just reminded me of how many times we get in a newer rental car, and there's when you shut it off and you put in park and shut it off, there's a little alert that goes that says check the back seat. So they're literally reminding people not to leave their own children in the back seat. And now we laugh because we're like, how dumb are people? But yes, we're at that point. It's also a good thing because I guarantee that may have saved someone's life. And if that little sensor was enough to how would that cost another $1 on the cost of that vehicle? Probably less.
So you and I are annoyed, but it's worth being annoyed. That's the type of message that wouldn't be rhetoric, right? That would be meaningful content. Let me give you one more. So every single year during this time, it's graduation time right now, bunch of kids pack in a car. They have no ill meaning whatsoever. They just want to go out and cheer and paint up their car. In Detroit, we painted up our car with messages, you know, graduation messages, and put banners on them with soap on the windows. And you drive around with loud music, cheering, and you're happy you're graduating, Brian, especially high school. That's a big accomplishment. And every single year around this town, some small town, around this time, some small town, the kids drive off, hit a tree, and they're all dead. And it is so somber, and it so affects the fabric of that town and so many families. 6 of the 8 graduates of, you know, so Nebraska died. Brian, those things, again, what we're talking about are preventable. We can predict that they're going to occur, and we continue to let them occur. And you're saying, oh, so we allow them to occur. No, listen to what I'm trying to tell you. If we don't take a stand against them, then by act of omission, aren't we allowing them to occur?
Right.
You get what I'm saying? I'm using rhetoric here to ask a question for our viewers to decide.
So let's bring it now after those examples. We've all seen them. We're seeing them right now.
Yep.
This is summer is starting. The graduation. These are perfect, relevant examples that kind of equate to what we're talking about and how we approach
Certainly.
these things, right? So now let's go straight to that school shooter.
Yep.
There's of course, after every investigation, all the prevent indicators are there, and people want to understand how and why. I mean, that's a big thing I hear is like one of the things we talk about and train, which is psychologically very difficult to do, is how to take another person's perspective. So can you tell me put me in the mind? How do I get the perspective of a school shooter?
Yep. So I got to jot a note down because you just hit on something smart. So Brian, play a game with me. Let me depose you. Remember when you were in high school and you wrote that notebook and you had the 2 columns where you wanted to rape and kill those certain students, and then you were going to light the school on fire, and when the cops came, you were going to start to shoot out. You remember that notebook?
No, I never did that.
Yeah. You know why? Because nobody keeps that fucking notebook. You've got to be damaged. You've got to be broken. There's got to be a part of you that's missing to do that. And you're saying, yeah, but every kid fantasizes. Yeah, Walter Mitty, I get it. But they don't fantasize about hate, death, and fear in this manner, and they don't have a plan, Brian. It's not clinically normal to react to external stress by literally in your sketchbook while you're sitting in class, draw you taking a machete and beheading the teacher that's in front of you and having laughter that's associated. Brian, those are broken humans. Now, the beautiful thing about this is there's very few of them that's around there. And some kid will see that and say, oh, that's kind of, they're doing it ironically, so I'll joke with it. But then after they see that cold stare and the person says, no, I'm amassing weapons because I want to kill, you understand what I'm trying to get at. It's so egregious. It's so outside of the ken of how normal children act in that society or in that situation.
So I take 2 big takeaways from that. Tell me if I'm right on this. One, you're not ever going to get inside the head of a school shooter unless you've thought of that before, unless you've done that and then you grew up past that, which we've talked to people who've done that and who ended up making a decision not to go through with anything and then became functioning members of society, right? So unless you're
at
that
least
person,
2 that we know of. Yep.
So unless you're that person, and then the other thing is what I'm getting from this is what separates, what you just described from normal adolescent teen crazy behavior. You're confused. You don't know anything. What separates that is a school shooter is going to demonstrate intent.
Precisely. So look, if you're getting incongruent signals and diminishing social interactivity, or you're getting an increasingly violent interactivity over time, those are changes in a human baseline. And specifically during this time, all kids feel that. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not understood. I don't have a good relationship. My parents are breaking up or just getting together or whatever else. But Brian, we've all had those. Every single kid in the United States, I'm not even going to talk about globally, but we could make that argument. But every kid in the United States, Brian, has had those same feelings, but they didn't show up with a gun and start executing their classmates. That's the difference. The difference is that when you assign intent to a thing, let's tell people what we're talking about. So Brian, I'm coming from the bar. I've got 2 burgers, 2 beers, and I'm walking back to Shelley on the far side of the bar. Okay, it's busy. It's July, right? And so you back up. I walk into you. I spill a little bit of the beer, and both of us now are turned and faced each other. And I go, hey, nice move, bumpkin, or something. And you go, hey, fuck you. Okay. Now listen, right there at that situation, all we have is talk. We have bluster, okay? We have Winnie the Pooh and the blustery day. Nothing is likely to occur. Now, I would tell you, hey, let's de-escalate that a little bit by both of us looking and going, hey, sorry, man, and you go, yeah, hey, keep your head on a swivel. Okay, we could have gone there, right? But the, hey, fuck you kind of hit me wrong. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So now I set down the tray that I was carrying. Okay, that's demonstrating intent. So you take a step back and you move the chair and you start rolling up your sleeves. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So those preparatory acts, Brian, demonstrate that this is going somewhere else. Much the same as we see in road rage. Okay, so the person passes you, the 2 people flip off, and now the person pulls in front of you and locks up the brakes. Brian, that's not careless, that's reckless. That's to the point that you know or should have known that the actions at that point are going to escalate. You get what I'm trying to say? If we talk about de-escalation, de-escalation isn't a thing that we bring with us. De-escalation is how we treat our entire environment. So intent is the opposite of that. Intent is, hey, you bumped into me, we're going to get busy right now. And then I show you that that's going to happen.
So that's an example I would understand. I mean, I can put myself in the mind of either one of those people. I'm standing there, someone bumps into me, or I'm carrying some drinks and food back to a table and I bump into someone. So what comes from that next? It's a normal interaction that happens a million times a day all over the world,
every day.
right? So what comes next has to do with the choices made by the actors involved in that situation, right? So that can spiral, wildly out of control. It could turn to them somehow becoming best friends and whatever. I mean, there's a multitude, a number of things that can happen there. It's a finite number of things, but there are, it's a large data set. And so what I'm getting at with that is I don't have to worry necessarily about you in that example. Like, you didn't mention the type of bar we were in. You didn't mention your clothing. You didn't mention my skin color. You didn't, meaning you took it to what behavior was demonstrated and was their intent demonstrated. If that response from me as you bump into me is, hey, F you, pal, you got a problem, that's very different. The problem is, oh man, hey, you're right there, man, like, you need a hand. Okay, two completely different reactions. So
let's go
that
there.
doesn't demonstrate any negative intent on my part,
right,
where one very clearly demonstrates an intent on my part.
Yeah. So Brian, the way my brain works. So I might get a name wrong or a time wrong or something like that. But I think the kid's name is Dylan Root that shot up the school. The hate mongering white kid shot up the black church in the basement while they were having. They actually sat with the parishioners. And then at the end pulls out the gun and kills. What a horrible, tragic story. Well, you talked about color of skin. So here's a kid that's radicalized, motivated by hate. Now, he could have been like a lot of other people in our country. And when I say a lot, there are people in the country that hate everything. There's other people that, run around at a 0.23 on the rage code all the time. But they don't act on it, Brian. So not only did Dylan choose to act on it, but he demonstrated intent by going to places that were specifically historically relevant to being able for black people to get ahead in our nation, and having the reformations that were necessary. And he went to those locations and he brandished flags and symbols that were against black folks, and then he wore outfits that just fomented argument and hate and violence and death. And then, he would flip off the camera. He would insert and insinuate himself into those places for civil rights. Do you get what I'm trying to say? And send exactly the wrong message. Now, what he was doing is he was taunting the audience, and that's a rehearsal phase for what he ultimately did. Now, two things happened there, Brian. One, he demonstrated intent, and two, the people around him either missed it or allowed it to go like water under a bridge go by and didn't connect the dots and say, we're about to have a violent encounter with this kid. Because it's so rare, we miss it. Because it's so rare, we don't assign a part of our brain to say, be on the lookout for that type of behavior. And that's why afterwards, the signs are so clear and we see all those and we can connect all those dots. But when it's in progress, it's like the other thing, like Dylan. Dylan had a chance, just like Timothy McVeigh, to shoot it out with the coppers, Brian. He chose not to. Why did he choose not to? He didn't choose because they ambushed him so cleverly and the cops were smart and they tackled him. He had a message, Brian.
Yeah, it was never part of the plan.
It was part of his plan. So a plan demonstrates intent too. You get what I'm trying to say? So what does a shopping list on your refrigerator demonstrate? Demonstrates intent. Okay, I'm going to go to the store, and these are the items that I'm going to pick up. So when a kid does that at Columbine and starts putting, I have to get weapons, I have to get ammo, I have to make bombs, why would that be different? You get where I'm going?
And you gave a list. So if I had my yellow pad out and was taking notes, I would have that, demonstrating intent on and start. I can add all of those examples underneath there as examples of someone who demonstrated their intent. Then I can even think of my own. And then on another section, I would write a list of contributing factors, right? So overall contributing factors. So one, obviously, mental health is one that you kind of
Yes.
started to talk about, because
Mental health is a big one.
yeah, it's a lack of, lack of empathy, lack of ability to of any sort of emotional control, which again, if you're a teenager, is not unusual. All right. But
Exactly.
when we start to add all these together as we go, then it becomes glaringly obvious. But one of the questions, you just brought up another example, who's someone who lashed out here in a mass shooting. It's not unlike a school shooting. We kind of, the way we look at them, we put them in similar categories because of the behavior of the individual. But why is it, because I'm still trying to understand this kid who's going to shoot up a school, Greg, why is it that in that case, let's say I have all that hate and all that anger, and I feel that I am not a part of this society and I'm different and I've been wronged, whatever. Why do I kill you? Why don't I kill me?
Yeah.
Like, why do I, why is that? Why do
That's a great question. So I would tack on, why do I kill others in my
others?
family that are close to me before I go in, and then continue to kill? And the reason I'm talking about that is, if we go back all the way to Whitman, the Texas Tower shooter, not to open an old wound, but get the idea down. Whitman shot his mom before he goes to the thing, to the tower to start shooting others. If we go back all the way to the Bath Township shooting, we have
Kehoe,
Kehoe kills his mom before he goes in. Here, the shooter most recently at Robb Elementary shoots his grandmother, in the forehead. So let's start there on our yellow pad and say, look, I'm about to do something that's so heinous and horrible that I don't ever want somebody to say, oh yeah, and when he was in kindergarten, he shit his pants and all the school laughed at him. I don't want anybody to be able to bring up my history. You know why, Brian? Because I'm rewriting my history starting now. So if we see that type of behavior where we're going to disassociate, it's not unlike sometimes the suicidal ideation where I'm giving my things away because I know I'm not going to go back. But here, the intent is that I'm going to rewrite my story right now. Now, I can't rewrite my story by just leaving a manifesto and killing myself because somebody might not read it. So I'm going to assign my death to an act. Okay. I'm not the problem in this, Brian. Everybody else does. I'm the victim. So because of that logic, because I'm the victim, I'm going to make people pay. I want to see you afraid. I want to hear you crying. Then I want to shoot you. But I don't want to encounter the cops in almost every incident. What I want to do is I want the pain to stop, and I want to say, okay, my story ends there. So I kill. Do you get what I'm trying to say? And then it's likely that I'm going to go somewhere else and kill myself at the scene, or do a suicide by cop. Why is that played over and over ad nauseum? Because I feel that I was wronged. I'm okay with my decision to do what I'm about to do because I'll never have to face the consequences. You get it? So if we're talking about somebody like I've got a problem with the FBI, but that's just me. But Brian, if we're talking about somebody that's torturing animals, if we're talking about somebody that's doing the arson, if we're talking about those psychopathy traits that we're going to see in these same people, that they don't get turned off by violence. As a matter of fact, they think of violence as a language. What we're going to do is we're going to look at that and we're going to say, okay, I know all kids are in turmoil, especially in high school. All kids are trying to find themselves. All kids are going through a breakup in their family or their personal breakup, or whatever the turmoil. The external schema is not always good, but none of those kids have made a plan to behead the principal, resort to being a cannibal, killing everybody in the school by locking the doors and lighting on a fire. So we have to understand that there's a clear line, and when that and you're saying, well, the line is not sometimes that clear. This is what the people at home are saying. Yeah, it is. When you're not taking consequences for your action, when you're demonstrating intent, Brian, and when you're staging things like rehearsals, that's clear. It's enough.
And the reason why we also brought that up is because a lot of things that you'll see, especially if we're talking about a mental health issue, is a lot of these sort of pre-event indicators will be similar, whether it's someone who's going to commit suicide or someone who's going to come in and shoot up the school.
Yep.
And the idea, it's still the demonstrating intent and how they handle things, right? So in kid who's going to come in and shoot up the school, well, Greg, you're the problem. It's everyone else's fault. It's not mine. Kid who's going to kill himself as well. Yep. Look, I'm a loser, just like I've always been. It's always my fault. You know what I mean? Like it's lashing out versus lashing in kind of. And
that's a great way of putting it.
But with all this, because there is greater attention on everything we're talking about. All the pre-event indicate, like if you went down all the school shooters, I always talk about when we talk about these different cases is that if you put all the writings and drawings and actions into a book, and each school shooter got their own book, or excuse me, got their own chapter in that book,
Yes.
you would have no idea that it was a different author in each chapter. I mean,
No, you
because
wouldn't.
it looks, feels, sounds, smells the exact same in everyone. And part of that is because they track each other and they follow up and they research these events and they do that. But if this information is all out there and we're all tuned in, we've got all these communication
Yes.
devices, we've got all these sensors out there, whether that's your TikTok or your Facebook or your Twitter or what, all this different stuff. If we're so tuned into that, how does this still occur? You know what I'm saying? Like the idea is,
so let's
if
go
it's all
back to
laid
the
out there
target
in front of
population.
us,
I totally agree. So let's not talk about a grievance-oriented workplace violence shooting
Okay.
that happens after somebody finds their wife with somebody else and then
Yeah, and
drives to
it's
a
a domestic
location.
violence situation, right?
Right. So we can classify those differently. Let's talk about the target population. Let's talk about school kids. Let's talk about kids killing kids. And I'll start first by expressing my disillusionment. Okay, so I'll tell you this: I'm too fat. Nobody loves me. I don't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. The kids at school bully me, and I showed up, and my gosh, I just sat in a corner and I cried. We all get that.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of us gets that. So then the second thing is I'll go online and I'll search actively for people that are disillusioned like me. So I'll go in there and I'll say, I'm too fat. I got, pre-adolescent diabetes. I don't understand. And all of a sudden you'll find, guess what? There's a chat group for that. And those kids are expressing it too. Yeah, my friends don't understand me. They're a bunch of asses and all that other stuff. Now, Brian, all of a sudden you say, hey, listen, I want to take a look at Hitler and Pol Pot, and I want to look at Joseph Stalin, because guess what they did? When people were different, they exterminated them. And the other thing, Brian, is those Columbine kids, man, they really got their say and their way by going in. Okay, where was the line that we crossed? Everybody feels in a certain way. But then when we start demonstrating the intent by doing research on those people that committed those heinous acts of mass violence, that's when we've drawn the line. So you're saying, okay, yeah, but kids all fantasize. Again, the fantasy argument. Yeah, kids fantasize with war. Why? Because war is about power, and power is something that we all dream of having. A girl might dream to be a princess. A boy wants to be the king. He wants to be out in front with the Knights of the Round Table behind him and do that stuff. But then he doesn't write down, and we're going to kill Susie, and we're going to kill Tommy, and we're going to barricade ourselves in. That's the clear stepping off point. And you're going to say, well, it's not so clear because we never hear it. Every single one of these school shooters engages in social leakage. The thing is, are we tuned in to read the frequency?
And this is why we use terms like demonstrating intent versus going off of whatever religious, cultural, or political or social ideology that the person espouses. Because when they do that stuff, this it goes back to the rhetoric. I think people are a lot of times just making stuff up as they go along without even realizing it. Because some of these people, they'll write some manifesto and you'll read it, and then you're like, well, wait, if you believe A, B, and C here, then you wouldn't believe E and F over here. So you don't even really understand what you're writing, right? You don't even really fully understand the concepts that you're just regurgitating. But and the reason why I don't like these interpretations, why we put it in, or to those things to be put in those type of categories, is because it doesn't help us prevent the next one. It doesn't help us understand it. It's, oh, he's a white supremacist or a black supremacist or a member, he's a wannabe Nazi. He's it's like, well, hang on. That doesn't help you understand the situation. In fact, it makes it worse, right? So you talked about demonstrating intent, and I know kids, people, humans in general, we all mimic each other's behavior. But one of the things that you made it clear is the insurgent, my daughter, she demonstrates intent sometimes when she gets upset and angry versus me telling her to go do something. And I say, hey, if you don't do this, I'm taking away that iPad that you get to watch for a couple hours at night. So, and then she said, yeah, well, if you do that, then I'm going to, okay. Now she's demonstrating her intent of what she's due, that she's clearly wanting to escalate the situation because whatever it is for her, it's the most awful thing in her world right now. Now, I know it's not, but that's very different than her saying, fine, I'll go clean the bathroom. Okay, so in one, yes, she complied with what I had to say. She might argue back, but that was a very clear demonstration of intent saying, I'm going to escalate this if you do that. Okay, that's something simple we see in all of our kids, we see in our friends and people. So So I just wanted to throw that example in there, Greg. I mean,
So
just
let me talk about your
because
child.
it's a white belt one. We don't have to look for everything. Doesn't mean danger and hate, death,
No.
and fear. And I got to
So let me
start
talk
here.
about
If I can do it in my house, I can do it at school.
yeah. So give me the right to talk about your daughter without you punching me in the eye next time you see it. What you're seeing and what you may have missed is that the tactic that she used was negotiation. So yes, she demonstrated intent, but she's also saying, look, I'm more mature now, so I want to discuss with you likely paths that are going to occur.
Yep.
And you're like, I'm the dad, go clean the room. Do you
Yeah.
get what I'm trying to say? But what happened next is the important thing. So
Yes.
engaging in negotiation, that tactic is good. It shows that she's growing mentally. Okay. She felt the need to speak out. She didn't feel the need to act out because people that want their say, that's fine. That's how we grow. That's how we learn. That's how we get our scar tissue. But people that want their say and their way, that's when we get a very different feeling. I'll give you an example of this.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't want to name, for example, we don't want to name certain classifications of people because it's not helpful. It's more rhetoric. So, for example, this incels that they're thrown around, involuntary celibate, and then those people are a subgroup of whatever, and they become very violent against women or other people that are making love. Brian, I was in high school. I wasn't getting laid.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Same.
I know a whole bunch of people that would have qualified as that incel. I know people that had different colored hair. I know people that dressed like, in my time, it was dressing like a hippie, a doper, a stoner. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Or you were a jock or whatever else. Brian, those things are natural. Okay, but what I
Yes.
didn't do is I didn't go out and burn down a local mosque. Do you get what I'm trying to say with that group? So the difference is that when I don't fear the consequences of my violent or illegal actions, okay, I think that I'm so different than you that I've earned this right over years of persecution or prosecution or whatever else. That's when the danger comes. So if she would have sabotaged something in the house, do you get what I'm trying to put a skateboard on the second step? I'm going to
Yeah.
get even with that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's absolutely not enough. And we also have to take a look at this, like the Nazi symbol. The Nazi symbol when a kid is running through a neighborhood and paints it on a white garage and then writes that he hates Jews and then keeps going through the neighborhood. That's a kid that's acting out. That kid can be
Right.
reined in. We can fix that. Do you see what I'm trying to
No,
say?
and
But
that
but,
goes
but the
back
kid
to
that
your
has a plan on going to the
yes.
local synagogue and lighting it on fire, that's a completely different thing. That's
And
what we're at the issue with here.
and that goes back into understanding and intent. What was their intent behind it? Do you think that 14-year-old kid who spray painted that on the sidewalk even really has a good full understanding of what that really means? I mean,
Yes.
and like you said,
they don't.
What are they trying to do? Are we trying to get a rise out of you? Or trying to get
That's
some
it.
attention, or am I making a plan? And those are two completely different things. And but you brought up a good point where about I mean your example was this incel community. We're like,
Yep.
oh, okay, join the club. I know a lot of people who were part of that in high school or younger, whatever. But the idea is we do need there's a sociological imperative for us to belong to a group, something. So that's
Yes.
why we choose this. And we always give the Mean Girls example from the movie where she walks into the lunchroom and it's like if you want, it's sociology 101 in a high school. It's a great example. And she goes, oh, those are the jocks, those are the drama kids, those are the band geeks, those are the math nerds, everyone has their clique, their group, their set that they have to belong to. And that can change across, like I'm a White Sox fan, so I'm in that clique, I'm in that group. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't have to be a something as dedicated as this, but I can take a look at what group those people are a part of, right? To kind of help me understand, because what is the intent of the group? Well, the intent of the stoner group is to go out and get high without getting caught. The intent of the jocks is just, we're going to talk about sports, and that's our biggest thing in life. Whatever that sport that is, it's football, baseball, basketball, don't care. That's their whole life. Well, that's all normal, and it's necessary, right? So it's those individuals we're talking about don't feel like they belong to any one of those groups. So what do we want to do? We want to have our own group, right? We want to do our own, and from there it can start, and they'll through things like homophily and isopraxism, they'll start to gather others,
to
other
act
like-minded,
more like exactly
other
like-minded
like-minded
people.
individuals, and that's an important part, because not because I don't care as much about what the name of your group is or what you're calling yourself. I care about what you're doing, because it's normal for someone to want to belong to something, but it's not normal for someone to demonstrate violent intent. That's
Precisely.
very, very different. And I say violent intent because, again, you gave some examples. Well, defacing school property, that's something that happens on a high school on a frequent basis. Yeah, I would imagine so. I think it is. But why did they do it? Were they trying to? Did they break the candy bar machine because they were trying to steal out of it and they wanted to get a free candy bar? Or did they do it and write a message on the wall because they hated some teacher for something? What was the whole intent behind this?
Yeah.
Rather than what group did that belong to? Hey, what T-shirt were they wearing? Or did they do they go to church? Like we come up with all of these different ways to try and understand this, and
Yep.
it's our way of trying to understand a school shooter. But what I'm kind of getting from this conversation is you don't need to. It's unlikely you're ever going to see the world from the perspective of someone who wants to shoot up a school. But guess what? You don't need to do that. You don't need to have that understanding. It's like reminding me before going on deployments, and we're going to give you a class on the culture and how different it is. Well, what do you think you're doing for me by doing that?
Right.
Look at how different
It's not
everyone is.
inclusivity, is it? Yeah.
Certainly
Right.
not.
Right.
And that stuff's great for the context of the situation, but it doesn't help determine what someone's likely intent is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we're all lonely. We all want to think that we're different, and we begin to look for folks that are like me. But when that comes to lonely, angry, and violent people that have no responsibility for their actions, and then when they start to put their actions and their statements together to demonstrate intent, now we have a completely different, very rare classification of human that will become or is very
Okay.
likely to become a school shooter.
Okay, so we're coming down this path of like likely candidates,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Absolutely.
So let's kind of, what does that look like? Because there are some things that are common to all of these are. So let's
Yep.
continue with that list of likely candidates.
So what I will tell you is somebody that's been off script for a long time, and that people know it, and that it's like that uncle or aunt that nobody wants to talk about in their own family. But this is that situation on steroids. And you're going to say, okay, well, why is it likely that we miss those things? And I'll tell you this, Brian, if every single time we get together and you go, hey, how's things? And I go, oh, it's my son again. Now he's drawing this on the wall and he's doing those and other. Okay, sooner or later you tune that out and you
Mm-hmm.
either decide that you're not going to ask me any more questions. You're not going to sit with me at lunch. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So I'm going to start closing that off to you. That also makes me feel guilty to say, well, Millie just, graduated at the top of her class. So we don't as a society take care of each other like we used to. We don't interact at that level. Why? Because just like monkeys, we used to have to sit with other members of our tribe and pick off the lice and eat them and pat them on the head. Why, Brian? Because empathy was a survival mechanism. It allowed us to see stress fractures in our personnel, in our group, before they did something stupid. Because if you weren't siloing the corn, you get what I'm trying to say? If you weren't out there fishing and you were actually sleeping in the middle of winter, Brian, our tribe could die. And you know what? Tribes pulled together when they saw other tribes in trouble. They pulled together. Why? Procreation was a necessity. So when you're talking about our list of candidates, you're talking about somebody that continues to choose off the menu. Okay, they continue to commit hate crimes or write violent manifestos or making drawings of them cutting the heads off of classmates. Okay, we all go through trauma, but how we deal with the trauma is the different part. If we deal with the trauma by going and lighting our cat on fire, if we
Right.
deal with the trauma by beating up a kid or breaking out the windows, that's the line. And listen, you can have a mental health issue and be lonely and angry all the time, and there's a way out. But if you do that and you choose your way out, which is acting out on a violent manner, then we have to do it. There's not one of these kids that doesn't have a violent background or a criminal background or a mental health issue background. So therefore, if we can quantify that, Brian, we can quantify everything. If we know the kids are going to drown and we give them swimming lessons, we're actually doing something. So here we've identified a subset of humans that are close enough to being broken that we have to identify them and we have to track their behavior for longer than we do the normal, and when I say it, I mean clinically normal kids that are around us all the time. It's okay for your kid to act up. It's okay for your kid to get in trouble with the law. That's part of them growing. But Brian, if they don't grow out of that, do you understand? If they don't pull out of that tailspin,
No,
here's when we have a problem.
and these things all compound. So there's a lot to talk about, but again, I go back to my list of like contributing factors, saying, okay, so the consistent mental health issues, a recent trigger event, or something that recently occurred in that person's life, that person has demonstrated intent. So I now as I start to build it and fill it in, it gets it gets a little bit more vivid, and I know we're going to talk about this. I just want to hit it right now without diving too much into it. We will talk about another one of those. Another contributing factor on those would be, access to firearms, access to weapons, things like that. And we'll kind of cover that later. And I don't want to think that we're glossing over something like that, but it's a contributing factor now of 4 or 5 that we've discussed so far.
Yep.
And it's important to list it out. Remember that, because I just want to reiterate at this point, Greg, there is no one thing. There is no model. There is no, if they do this, then you got them. There's no one thing I need to learn. And so that makes it a little bit more complex. But at the same time, we go back to this school. Well, a school is a petri dish. It's a closed system, as close as you could get, because it's the same kids every single day. For multiple years. They've likely known each other for a long time. Like all of that stuff is there. So you have this sort of map of their behavior. So when you're talking about comparisons and baseline and what's normal, because that can get confusing. A kid acting out is, because we just said, right, a kid acting out completely normal when you're 16 years old. That's what you do. Go ask my parents. That continues today. I turn 39 tomorrow, and I still act out towards my parents, right? But how do I compare that to something that isn't just acting out? Now, this is that's what we're talking about, though.
This is what we're talking about. So let's I'll do 2 things, and then that'll be enough of a remark of the ramp up to what a school shooter feels like. 1, stop thinking that it's somebody else's kid, because we're talking about your kid. We're talking about the neighborhood kid. We're talking about the kid in your school that you see all the time and every day. We're not talking about some thing that comes out of nowhere. It never comes out of nowhere. Anytime you see those kids that are planning, engaging in violent action, seeking out weapons, supporting violent ideologies, making online threats, making veiled in-person threats, Brian, those are all demonstrations of intent. So now, what's the difference between a threat and a credible threat? Well, a threat, a physical action, a repeated conduct, something that would cause a reasonable person to be in fear for their safety or the safety of others. And I would include any step towards a goal that completes or acts out that threat. So Brian, if I was giving away my stuff and amassing weapons and blocking open a door, okay, those are school shooter activities. You get what I'm trying to say? Now, you may say, well, they also could be indices of self-harm. Okay, well, guess what? It's just as important.
You found
if you decide to kill yourself, a suicidal fascination or ideation, or a homicidal fascination or ideation, both of those are warning signals. Danger, warning, Will Robinson. So that's where you got to act first or act fast, Brian. And that's where we're not doing enough. If we engage in nothing but at bang thinking, then it's a crapshoot. We have to move the dial to the left.
And we're definitely going to get into that eventually, of what we mean by at bang thinking. But everything we talked about, you can go back to any one of these examples that we've used, or any other example that anyone knows of, and you're going to find all of them there. You're likely going to find every single thing that we've discussed so far. I mean, it's almost textbook. But to kind of focus it a little bit more on the most recent at the Robb School in Uvalde, Texas. We look at different things when these situations occur, because 1, the investigation is still going on. Everyone reaches out to us, says, hey, can you comment on this? What do you think? And we go, well, why? Because I get my information from Twitter. It's probably not the best place. How much stuff comes out real quick? It spreads like wildfire, and that's never really what actually happened.
It's pulled back.
Some of it gets walked back. That's every single time, because it just happens. But one of the things that occurred, and I think this is a good example of how we look at these things. I'd like you to explain, like, he got into a traffic crash before he entered that school. It was outside. So when I look at that, I go, how do you just by chance get in a traffic accident on the way to go do this attack that you've been planning for, that you clearly have demonstrated your intent, you've come up with some sort of plan, no matter how rudimentary it is, you've thought about it, you've rehearsed it in some manner. How do I get in an accident on the way there?
Yeah. So I would tell you, look at our recent episode. We talked about the Roseville, Michigan situation. Why? Because if you're a first responder and you're showing up at an accident scene, every once in a while, not very often, but every once in a while, that's an attempted suicide, and the person is going to do a suicide by cop. Or you're going to encounter this Uvalde shooter, and he's dragging his guns out of the wrecked car and start shooting. Do you see what I'm trying to say, Brian? So when we talk of the auspices of situation awareness, we're talking from the idea that this may be in progress, and you're just getting on the carousel now. So anticipate that any situation could likely be this. So the simple answer for you, mission focus. I'm so mission focused on getting to the school and getting inside that school and starting that shooting that I'm not paying attention. Oh shit, the light changed. I'm sliding to a stop, and the next thing I know is I avoided a traffic crash, but now I'm in the ditch. So what do? People look, now I'm carrying the guns out and I start shooting because now my incident scene, my crime scene starts at the traffic crash. You get what I'm trying to say? So that puts into a sequence, a chain of events that begins a sequence of events that is going to be talked about for 20 years, and every year on the anniversary date, we're going to go, how could we have missed this?
And
what I'm saying to you about that is that also gives us lead. That didn't just happen. So now we've got the crash. Then we've got the movement from crash scene to school grounds. Then we've got school grounds into the school. Do you see all those chances, Brian, that we could have done something to intervene?
And part of the reason why I brought that up is because I wanted you to get that explanation of mission focus, because that's all. So he could have missed a vehicle coming right at him and crashed into it because he was so mission focused, and everyone's going, well, what does that even mean? How would you miss that? Well, if you've ever been in such a hurry leaving the grocery store because you got 10 things you got to do, and your arms are completely full, and you're dragging the kid and you're trying to pull your keys out, and you almost get hit by a car or almost walk right out into traffic. Well, that's because you're so mission focused about what you're doing. All right, it's not about being distracted. You have somewhere to be. If you're so mission focused as a teacher or a parent, that's part of the reason why we don't miss, or that's part of the reason why we miss some of these big indicators. Because, dude, I got 30 kids in this one period today, and I've got 6 more periods that I have to teach, and they all got to learn math, and I got to get this, and they got to make sure they hit the scores so that we get funding for next year. And I got to make sure this, I'm so mission focused on what I'm doing. I'm missing what in hindsight is glaringly obvious.
Precisely. So I would liken it to something you see every day. Stop mystifying this. Stop making this bigger than it is. It's going to occur again. It's occurred before. So think of it in context of something that you can break down and fix. That's how society is going to get through this. So, Brian, we have weather prediction, right? We're better at weather prediction now. We see these certain situations coalesce, and that means that this low pressure system is going to bring snow or rain. And so we warn the people out ahead of that. But still, some people die because they don't heed those warnings. What we want to do is we want to get this situation to where it's manageable, where when we see those things, those cues, those pre-events constellation of evidence and artifacts that would tend to show us that your kid's going to be a school shooter, that we take action on it. Brian, I would point back to even Adam Lanza's mom.
Yeah.
Adam Lanza's mom got so far afield. He was crying all the time. There was things that she started to disassociate with Lanza because she didn't understand it. Her husband left her. Look, when it gets that serious, you've got to tell somebody. You've got to be external with your thoughts, and you've got to go and ask for help. There's help. There's help somewhere. Because if you don't do that, Brian, then you're going to have one of these tragic accidents or incidents occur in your neighborhood as well.
So, I mean, we've kind of been I know in this first initial sort of installment taking to why and how these things occur, and we talked about a bunch of issues and why they get missed. One, we talked about what are some of the contributing factors, what why physiologically, sociologically, psychologically we don't always see these things coming in the moment. And you did talk about what's a credible threat was this, because we talk about demonstrating intent and what to focus on. So if with all the different, just the different incidents we discussed in the last, whatever, 45 minutes that we've
Sure.
been talking. Pre-event indications are a way we can predict, identify, mitigate, and prevent these disastrous events. So what I want to try and kind of summarize a little bit of what we talked about in that, and sort of of an ending for this initial chapter, because we're going to talk about how and why we get things wrong, but we've sort of laid the groundwork for that in a sense. And
I think so.
I think not only what we see, what we don't see, why we don't put those things together, because then everyone wants to say, well, we need some reporting system where we can log all this stuff in an app. And then someone's going to say, well, no, you can't do that because of privacy laws. And these are not something that needs to be federally mandated, funded, taxpayer, approved for it's, you and I sitting in the teacher's lounge or the break room at the office or wherever with the community going, hey, do you notice anything about Billy? Let me tell you what happened. And then someone goes, wait, what did you say about him? Because I saw this over here. And then next thing you know, that's how that information sharing, we didn't really talk about it yet, but and we will kind of a little bit in the next one, but we don't feel obligated to do that anymore, and we don't have those conversations. And I keep it to a simple conversation, because what we're trying to talk about in these episodes this is a way of understanding it, how to sense make, how to problem solve, and how to make a decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have to understand that I don't need to understand a school shooter. I can look for how they demonstrate intent, a whole bunch of contributing factors. Has this increased significantly over time? Is their behavior escalated or de-escalated? These are all the things that we talked about. But then just sitting around having a conversation, Greg, I think is a start to this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I guess what we're trying to do here, Brian, in this series, in this 3-part series, is we're trying to say, pull out the yellow pad, and if you're going to have a discussion, here's some discussion starters. Here's some points of likely intervention where you would have made a difference, because we can always get less than lethal force alternatives. We can harden the school. We can do all these other things. But Brian, is it going to stop school shooters? Is it going to help us identify them? Is it going to help us be left to bang and give us the gift of time and distance? I think that's why we're here today, and I think that the follow-on episodes are really, really going to help flesh that out.
Yeah. So again, we kind of wanted to hit why and how these things occur, to show at a sort of a 30,000-foot view that there's a lot of contributing factors to these things. There's a lot that go into them. We just need to understand it better. And I think the way that we're understanding it right now is not the best way, because it's the way things are approached hasn't fixed the problem before in the past. And I see people approaching them the same way. So why would we expect it to be any different? And that's my big point on here. So I will kind of just end this chapter, I think, Greg, unless you have something else to add on what we talked about so far.
No, let's just remember, anytime somebody's threatening to do violence and then targeting a group or a location, that's planning. Anytime that you're engaging in planning that demonstrates intent, intent is the key to doing something to shut off an incident far left as possible before it becomes deadly.
Yeah, it's a good point. So we'll pick up with the next chapter on how and why we get things wrong.
Perfect.
All right, Greg. So we just kind of wrapped up talking about the first chapter about how and why these things sort of happen. So the next one is how and why do we get things wrong? Meaning, right. This is, like we said right up front, this is nothing new. School shootings, mass shootings, this type of violence is not new at all, and yet it keeps happening, and we don't seem to get any better at really getting our hands around the problem. So, I mean, I guess we'll start generally. Well, how do we get it wrong? Like, yeah. why does that keep happening, right?
So one of the things I think, Brian, is that the proposed solutions aren't measured responses. What I mean by that is, like, if we take a look, a lot of times we knee-jerk something, and then we end up throwing money at it, and then we're an inch deep and a mile wide. So if you take a look at drunk driving, for example, okay, drunk driving has been around the United States since they passed the law in 1910. Does that mean that's when it started? No, it started when Otto Benz, made the first internal combustion engine, and Franz said, "Hey, I think I'm going to have a beer and go out and celebrate." But the idea is, from those earliest days till now, we know a lot. From the earliest school shootings till now, we've learned a lot. The problem is that we've got sort of a piecemeal action. We're getting better at addressing the issue, but our response is all over the board. There's no structure, and there's not an accepted U.S. standard. For example, the people got mad because we said that, for example, in California, you grab the people that you're with and you go in, and that's there's a number of states that do that. There's some other people that say, hey, listen, you set up an IC and then you do these type of things. What I'm telling you is it's not going to get any better. What we're doing wrong is we're all saber rattling, we're all yelling, we're all demanding action, yeah, but we haven't even defined the problem yet. Okay, so
Right.
so when you have a hard problem, sometimes you got to take a look at it. And let me give you an example. Governor Abbott, like or hate him, says today, hey, we're going to have unannounced people try to get in and see if they can get past your security and how quickly we can. Okay. Now,
Wow,
what
that's
sounds like an incredible
yeah.
idea at the beginning is going to terrorize children, and it's going to get somebody killed.
It's going to get
Because
someone
the parent's
killed.
going to see a guy trying to walk into the
Yep.
school. They're going to escalate their level of violence. Look, we can predict that. So why don't we slow down, have a measured response? People are going, are you telling me to slow down? We have to do something. Listen, we're doing something, but what we're going to do is we're going to bring to bear the best minds in the industry. Brian, we're not going to be able to arrest our way out of this. We're not going to be able to legislate our way out of this. We have to think our way out of this.
And this is why we bring up all of the different contributing factors to these, because you can't just address one and expect everything to go away.
Precisely.
I mean, there is no golden piece of the puzzle that goes, if we just had this, then we'd be good. And I take as much of a nonpartisan view of most of these issues as I possibly can, because when it comes to policy things, like you have to be a realist and you have to understand that there's unintended consequences and things. So, we pick something that we think is the problem and we go toward it. And I just kind of thought of a great example of how, those well-intended things can go catastrophically wrong, or not catastrophically wrong, but there was an example, and this is sort of like an economic example that people tried to do for, lower socioeconomic neighborhood. They said, well, we got to bring stuff into this neighborhood. We have to invest in this neighborhood. They need stores. They need this. Okay. So they said, well, let's put a grocery store in this neighborhood. And people went, okay, that's great, because people from the neighborhood can work there, and then we'll have more stuff coming in. But it sounded like, brand new store, nice new parking lot, the lights are on. Hey, this is great. And then what you realize is, well, that actually has the opposite of effect, because yes, some people from the neighborhood get jobs there, but it's not like some super high paying job. It's not very powerful position, and a lot of people aren't necessarily from that neighborhood that work at that store. But what you do is you bring in goods from outside of that area, and then the people inside that area are spending their money there. So it actually had the exact opposite economic effect, where money was now leaving the neighborhood from this central point versus things coming in. And it's just an example of what I mean when we say, well, here's what the solution is going to be.
So
sounded like a great idea at the time.
Let me Lego onto that, okay? So I talked about drunk driving. So we fixed drunk driving. It's no longer a problem.
Yeah.
No. Okay. Is drunk driving still a problem? Look, it's illegal to drive drunk in every single state in the union. That yet every 45 minutes somebody is killed in a drunk driving crash. Okay. That's what we have to take a look at. Are we always going to live with school shootings? We're always going to live with mass shootings, because we've created an environment where the one-upsmanship and a broken human looks at that and says, I'm going to, do a challenge. Therefore, we also have to assign that there's a difference between mass shootings and school shootings, right? And we will have to accept the fact that even if we say and we declare zero tolerance on school shooting, it's going to take time even to bring those numbers down to a reasonable standard.
No, and that, we again, the reason why we talk about this in the complex manner in which these things happen is because this is not a short-term solution. You keep throwing short-term solutions at a long-term, like, hey, let's just get a bunch of people let's pay them to secure the place. That's not a strategic objective or goal. That's just a let's throw something at this. And I understand that, but you can often do more harm that way, or you often have to do things that you don't mean, and it misses the point and doesn't actually
Yes.
prevent it. And like the drunk driving one then is a perfect example on a number of levels, because it's a subjective sort of measurement of whether or not you're sober enough to drive, Greg, because we have this reading, right, of a blood alcohol
Yep.
concentration scale that if you're, a police officer could say, hey, I believe that you're suspectedly drunk driving. This is why I need you to do this test. There's all the laws behind it, but hey, in some states it's a 0.1, and some it's a 0.08, some it's but it's just a completely subjective thing to
But
go.
But let's compare that, Brian. I completely agree with your point of view and your assessment, because that's absolutely true. But Brian, all of the same pre-event indications of drunk driving are universal.
Right, but my
Okay,
point of this is
and we know that drunk driving is dangerous. You
but
get what I'm saying?
but
We can get. Go ahead.
my point of how these laws work on the drunk driving one, because yes, I agree with what you're saying, but
Yep.
if you the only true scale would be, if you have any alcohol whatsoever on board, you should not be able to drive. I mean, because that's the only pure way of doing things. Because meaning a beer for me, Greg, might be nothing, but a beer for you, and you should not be operating any heavy machinery. But your blood says this, so what I mean by this is when we go to enforce a policy, right? There often can be subjective. And so if we want it black and white, you can make it black and white. You can make it a 0 or 1 in some of these cases, but we don't want to do that, because what would that do to the US wouldn't go for that. No one would go, yeah, if you have any alcohol in your system, you can't drive a car. No one would do
Right.
that. No restaurant would ever want that, because they'd say, well,
Right.
no one would come here, because then you have to Uber or get a taxi home, even if you just had a glass of wine with dinner. But so oftentimes what I'm getting at too is, oftentimes when we try to enforce something like this, or we try to legislate our way out of these things, you got to remember we're giving we have to give something up in order to gain something, and oftentimes we're not willing to give things up in order to gain something.
I will agree with that point. I will agree that in every aspect of this, that more investigation is going to disclose more similarities, and those similarities are going to help us create a universal measured response. The problem is that sometimes the loudest voice gets the most attention,
Of
and it's not the
course,
best answer.
most of the time.
And let me give you an example of that. Both schools that we've recently dealt with, Oxford and Rob, both had active shooter training
Mm-hmm.
just before they had an active shooter situation. So saying that active shooter training is enough for your school is obviously not true. So we have to stop doing that. We have to disabuse people of that. I disagree with I would take a scientific look at blood alcohol content and say it's a giant step in the right direction, and therefore I am willing to give up certain personal rights to avoid catastrophic accidents on the freeway. And I think you're in agreement with that.
Violent agreement.
But
Yes,
you're saying
yes.
what happens is that sometimes when we like Brian, are we talking about ending gun violence, or are we talking about addressing school shootings?
So that's
my
what I'm
point?
getting at, and that's what I'm getting
Yeah.
at is that, so access to firearms is obviously a major contributing factor to every single
Yep.
one of these shootings. Of course,
Yep.
it's done that way, and that is a serious issue that needs much better legislation, I think. But to get out of making that the central issue, when I don't like it when it becomes just about guns and access to firearms, because one, when it comes to policy, I become very much a realist. If you are going to legislate something, you're going to make a bill, like you have to make a very you have to be a realist about it and say, what is this really going to do? Because you might have the best intentions in mind and you might want to do all the stuff, but if it's just symbolic and it's never really going to work, and while it's not enforceable, don't fucking do it. So that's my problem with it. But when it comes to the gun stuff, everyone say, hey, we got to end this gun violence. Okay, well, I don't see you screaming every day about Baltimore and Detroit and Chicago and Atlanta, where gun violence is so horribly out of control. It's ruined generations of families in the United
Yep.
States. That's
Yep.
where gun violence is. Because if I'm thinking about something, we do targeting, Greg, in a sense, and we have before in the past in a real sense of what people would think of targeting. But if I'm going to do a cost benefit analysis and get the most bang for my buck, and I want to end gun violence, I'm almost not even going to talk about school shootings. I mean, purely if I look at the numbers, well, I can
by the
address that.
numbers, you're
I can
exactly right.
address that somewhere else. And the problem is when we talk about it like this, everyone goes, "Oh, well, you're just a gun guy." No, not at all. Actually, yeah, I have a few, and I have more training than the average person on them. But it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, I'm not saying that these shootings have nothing to do with guns. I'm saying as a legislation or why we get things wrong point is we all pick something that we're familiar with. So if
Yep.
you're dead set on the fact that this is a mental health issue, that's what it is to you. If you're
and
dead
you'll
set,
never waver.
and
You'll believe
if you just
exactly.
think well, it's simple because it's not illogical to think, Greg. This is a logical way to think. Well, if we just denied him access to a gun, this wouldn't have happened. Okay, that's not illogical, but it's wrong. Meaning,
Yeah.
you're still not addressing the issues that need to be addressed, and you're doing what we would call at bang thinking. You're saying, oh, this is the event right here, this is when it started. No, motherfucker, it started a long time before that.
Right. So let's go there for just a second, and let's do it under the guise of two things that we talk about a lot in human behavior pattern recognition analysis. One is confirmation bias, and the second is a fundamental attribution error. Both are at play here. I'll give you an example of confirmation bias. Okay, I'm at home seeing another school shooting, and I go, here's another school shooting, send us in there. We've got the answer. We'll be the ones that do it. Once I do that, I can never come off of a measured response by a group of people. And I'll give you a quick example of that, Brian. So we're talking about 10,500 deaths on the roadway each year due to drunk drivers, and about 14,000 gun-related deaths during that same period. That's gun-related homicides. Over half of all of the gun-related deaths in the United States were suicide. And that's an important number, but what your number was that gets me to the fundamental attribution error is we think assault weapons are the key, but of all firearm murders, only 3% were committed with what we call assault weapons.
So let me
we are categorizing.
Yeah, but let me be clear on that, because so now if I know that, Greg, and I'm going to go, I want to end any gun-related death. I don't care if it's suicide, homicide. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's accidental discharge or something. Whatever the issue is, I want to end all of those. What I would do from a targeting perspective is take everything you just said and look at it and go, I got to do a cost-benefit analysis. Where am I going after here? What am I going to target? Where am I going to start? And these type of attacks, as horrible as it sounds, it's almost statistically insignificant, sort of. And that's
exactly
awful.
True.
That's awful to say, but it's not that it's insignificant. It's just, if I'm going to take a look at this like an economist would look at numbers on a profit and loss statement and extrapolating that over a market economy and the GDP of a nation and trying to predict something or target something, say, hey, we need to improve this area, this would look different. So if you're saying we need to do this and you want to end gun violence, either A, most of what I hear people saying is ineffective and lacks a lot of knowledge in the subject. You can tell by the way they talk about it. And also, it just, Greg, my thing about that is, if it worked, I'd be all for it. Like, if it solved the problem, I'd be like, let's do this.
I think the other foot should drop too on that, Brian. I think that, and we talked about this offline before. Do you just not know better, or are you being disingenuous? Are you really trying to do something, or are you just saber rattling? And what I'll go to is, we just passed Memorial Day weekend, thanks to all the veterans that gave the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. And Chicago was a shooting gallery. It's not the only place, and don't think I'm bagging on Chicago. I'm not from Chicago, okay, but I'm from a similar place, and I understand some of the issues. But Brian, where were we there? Do you get what I'm trying to say? The most violent
51
Memorial Day
people were shot.
So if we're really going to talk about it, we have to. And what I mean by measured response, Brian, obviously what we're doing now is working in some cases. You know how I know that? Because we're scooping up copycats. I know that people are being stopped that are in the planning stages. So we're doing a lot better. And I would liken that to smoking. Okay. It took
Right.
us a long time to get into the industry
Yes.
because smoking was a huge industry with lobbying and money and everything else, right? And so we were fighting them. And what did the smoker, with Marlboro and all the other ones, I'm getting sued now. What did they all say? Wait, there's no causal link. There's no proximate cause between smoking and cancer.
Yeah.
Well, then all the studies came out and said there were. So then they did this and that and all those things. And after all the smoke and mirrors was gone, Brian, what happened? We understand that smoking is a contributing factor, which you named on our first episode, to these types of emphysema and deaths that are related
Yeah.
to heart disease and everything else. So have we done a better job? Yes. We've taken it out of films. We've taken the advertisements down.
Yeah,
We're
it's
not
just such a
glorifying it.
no, it's such a known thing, and it's not even we've made it publicly, like it's socially unacceptable. Like you
And
have
it
to go
only
out.
took a year.
It started, yeah, right.
You
This
see where
started
you get my
exactly.
point? Now look, vaping came in, right? Because
Yeah.
vaping was smoking light, and then we had a whole problems with vaping and get our hands around it. Look, are we legalizing marijuana? Or are we decriminalizing marijuana? The problem is what we're not doing, Brian, is we're so in a hurry to say that was reprehensible and it was so bad. There was a guy on news this morning, and I don't watch the news, so I got to look up news on my computer, and he said, "Hey, listen, the corrections to the system from George Floyd wouldn't have happened unless we would have just kept beating the humans down by showing the video over and over and over. No, it
No,
was wrong. People knew it was wrong.
It was
and people
already
still
wrong
said
when
it
it
was wrong.
happened.
Exactly.
Like the
Okay.
rules were already there. The guy broke the rules.
Yes,
Like
and he should have been arrested.
yeah.
He should have been fired. But my point on it is this guy went the next step. The other shoe fell, Brian, and he said, so we should have the parents release some of the photos of their dead kids at the school because that's the only way we're going to get people interested. Look, pal, if you don't think that people are interested right now, that's the fundamental attribution error.
Yeah.
When we go after the wrong thing, when we go after and vilify the AR-15 rather than the shooter,
Or
when
no,
we go
now we're
after and
vilifying
vilify
the
the
cops.
police,
Now
okay,
it's police. Now
we
it's
chased the Oxford shooter's family down until they had to run and flee because they were afraid of mobs killing. Brian, they weren't afraid of ultimately coming to justice. They knew it was their kid. Okay, they'd gone to the school. You know what they were worried about? They were worried about the crowd getting so incensed by it that the crowd was going to drag them out and kill them for what their son had done. I understand that pain.
Yeah,
I
well,
understand that
the
fear.
other thing specifically to when it comes to whether it's guns or cameras or whatever,
Yep.
it's much easier. We want a thing. That's a thing we can blame it on.
I can
We
point to it.
We don't want to put responsibility on
You're exactly
someone unless we really don't like them. I mean, you just brought it up. One of the reasons this chapter we're talking about of why
Yep.
we get things wrong is we always look for two things in these events. We want a hero and we want a villain.
You're
And
exactly
those
right.
things can change. So the Robb Elementary School shooting was the BORTAC agent who went in there. We got our hero, right? We have our hero. So
Yep.
and the villain this time was the other
Every
police
police
who was
officer
there.
that was a fumbling idiot.
So the one guy we're good with, the other 99 there we're not. And
Yep.
not saying they don't deserve an absolute ton of criticism, but you do have to wait till these things come out. But it's too late, right? Meaning everyone's made up their opinion regardless of not knowing what was actually happening or the timeline. But
you have no idea what you would do in that situation. The only way out of that is training, because the more
right.
that you train, but obviously it has to be a measured response training. Look, we had two things I want to bring up so people know that we lose friends just for telling our scientific opinion. One, we had what I would consider a very good friend and a subject matter expert completely glossed over the prevent idea that we could predict violence and stop it, and said, hey, we got to stop all this and work on that response. Okay, that's at-bang thinking. At-bang thinking is too late in to have a mitigation effect of it. Maybe you can save some lives, but most of the time you get there and the people that are dead are already dead. Okay, so let's not put all our eggs in one basket. Second thing is we had a person from Texas that's closely involved with school stuff. We won't get any closer to that. And they said, hey, listen, instead of doing this, we got rid of all of these hardening tools at our school, and we invested in more cameras, right? And
we hired a person.
And we hired a person that's going to manage those cameras. What you're going to do is when somebody comes in and they're scared, they're afraid, they're angry, you're going to point and you're going to say, see those cameras? That's going to look. We had a running documentary on this Robb shooting from the time the guy got into the accident till the time he shot, till the time he climbed the fence. How is that any different than Oxford shooter having the gun in the bag when he's there with his parents? Brian, what we have to do is we have to slow down, let calm heads prevail, and take a look at it and stop attributing it to that monster. It's the Loch Ness monster. That's all it can be. Because when we do that, when we have a hero and when we have a terror, I can't live up to that hero sometimes. There was people on the road when that guy wrecked that car and came out shooting.
Yeah.
What happened at the call center? We don't know yet. Okay, did people call and say, you have a man with a gun? Early reports were that the security guard engaged in a firefight with the guy. We now know that's wrong. We know the security guard left the school grounds, checked the perimeter for the shooter, and actually captured one of the teachers that he thought was the shooter. Well, we don't even know if we can believe that yet. You get where I'm going? What's happening is we're so scattershot now on the response, and then somebody's going to say, are you saying more study is necessary? We've got to have 5 more school shootings? No. What do we know from school shootings? Brian, what do we know from Jeffrey Dahmer? Jeffrey Dahmer didn't invite people from his apartment complex over. Why? Because he had a fucking skin suit hanging in the closet and he had body parts in the freezer. John Wayne Gacy didn't invite you over for pinochle because he had decomposing corpses in his crawl space and it smelled. What I'm saying, Brian, is if we learn that when we see something that's an incongruent signal, and it's a protracted incongruent signal, we have to take action on it. And whether that's human trafficking, whether that's child abuse, whether that's drug abuse, we have to have a measured response that makes sense, not this holy shit, everybody do something your own way.
Well, and that's again, it's just my issue with that is when we all pile on and say this is the answer, we just need to do this, then what happens is we do that and it doesn't work. And then everyone's outraged again, and you're going like,
but why are you outraged? You're outraged because you spent time and money and emotion and input.
I don't think anyone spends any time on this unless it's on social media ranting and raving, and that's the issue. But it's another one of these is why we get this stuff wrong is we'll throw money at something. We'll hire a company to put in the cameras and teach some of the administrators how to do Krav Maga, and we'll pay for some company to send some uniformed security person. Oh, we don't know shit about them. We don't know their training level. We don't know what they do, but so we'll throw money at it. People, every agency we work with, every school, anyone right now has more money than they've ever had in their budget ever. So it's not about money. It's about time. People don't want to, take the time to understand why and how these things are happening, why and how we are getting these things wrong, and then what to do about it. And that's the point, is you have to invest time. You don't need a comprehensive federal government guideline. No, they've got money. They've got grant money for you, right? So then you can go, hey, at our place, we need to do this because that's perfect for us. Okay, here's your grant money. Go do it. That's the beauty of it now, is you don't need something comprehensive and big. This is a local problem that requires local solutions. And I mean, you don't go back and
there is no one size fit all.
But think about it. Why does this school shooter? Why do they go to a school? Why do they go to a school to shoot a bunch of people? And I'll tell you, it's the same reason why you have a veteran goes to the VA to commit suicide. Why? Yep. They fucking know.
Or a cop does it in the lobby or in their police car.
It's their. This is what you know. So they're going and seeking familiarity, just like when you're convinced that the problem is that they weren't God-fearing Christians. Just like you're convinced that's the problem, that's what you're going to fall back onto every single time. And you just don't have, you got to pull it out in the clear light of day. I mean, it's, I don't know. I mean, that part of it is this, that like you so eloquently said about confirmation bias and fundamental attribution errors. That's getting in the way of it. I mean, how many years have we been having these discussions with people and explaining to them, and they go, well, we'll wait and see. Yep. And then every time something happens, what happens?
I don't even want to get into that because I'm still so angry. That's how we lost that friend, because the friend that told us about the up-armoring their school by having the extra cameras and the balustrades and everything else, they were frustrated, and I made the mistake of saying, hey, good luck with that. We've been down there a ton of times and nobody's listening. Why, Brian? Because I was as frustrated as that person, and that person has a couple of kids that are in those schools, and I granted they have a vested interest, but no more than my vested interest, Brian, because listen, there's a situation where we go after vulnerable victims. A pedophile does it. People that victimize sex trafficking victims do it. So what do I want as a shooter? Okay, I have a captive audience. You get what I'm trying to say? Most of them are kids that I'm not going to have to fight with. So the more cowardly you are, the more Lanza-ish or this shooter at Rob, the more that you're going to see. You shot your granny. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Then you took 1,600 rounds and went to where there's a bunch of little kids. Why? Because your electrochemical neurotransmitters feed you that fear. You're now immortal. You're now getting that body count. We have to stop that, Brian. We have to look. We used to do perp walks. Do you remember when perp walks were popular? What were we doing? We were just showing other people, wow, man, look at the time that that person is getting in the sun. Bank robbers rob banks because that's where the money is. School shooters shoot up schools because they have the most vulnerable victims in our society. The only thing that would be worse if we decided to go to the hospital. Remember the one we talked about in Asia where the guy with a knife went to the baby ward, I just can't, the maternity ward, and started stabbing babies like it was free. You know, why? Because they chose a soft target with vulnerable victims and there wasn't a high degree of security there. That's what we have to address. And simple things like there need to have their say in their way sets them apart. This is a very, very, very small segment of our society. And I want you to look at how many books are written. Go out there and look at Langman's book and this guy's book and that guy's book. And what's the other guy named after the college or the college is named after him? What is it?
Cornell.
Yeah, Cornell. Okay. These are good idea fairies. They're coming out with all kind of stuff, Brian. But you know what? When it comes right down to it, has it caught a school shooter before the act? And you're going to say, well, we don't know. It's like, you know, parking a traffic unit on the side of the road and it regulates the speed of the drivers. Yeah, again, fundamental attribution here. You're talking the wrong thing. I don't want to mark a kid with a number and add up and subtract numbers as he goes along, Brian, because we're all broken humans. Okay, I want to go after only the people that are targeting our most vulnerable aspects.
So because we're so reliant and on technology, just throughout human history, we always want to come up with a technology that makes something easier or solves a hard problem. That's ingrained, hardwired in humans since, you know, Mukhtar whittled the first, you know, wheel out of a stone. You know what I mean?
You got it.
And that's it. It's just been ingrained. So we look for some sort of technological solution because we want something simple and effective. And that's what I constantly push back at is like, you personally have to get involved. You do. You have to do this. You have to go to the school. You have to be the one that understands this. Not can we hire someone? Can we get an app? Can we do? I mean, it's absolutely insane, but we don't want to get involved. We don't want to give up our time. And as long as we continue to not put our time into this, it'll never stop. And
Ukraine,
and, you know,
we'd rather send our money and feel good about sending our money to Ukraine than actually taking a stand.
But again, that's a great way of looking at it. Why? Because that's an external threat. I can build that up. Here's people fighting for their lives and their democracy and big bad evil Russia. So we've got the boogeyman, we've got our villain,
and a terror. Here we go.
We get a villain and a hero right there.
Yep.
But when we don't like insider threats, we don't understand them as a society as a whole. And when I'm talking about an insider threat, I'm talking about a school shooter. I'm talking about a kid who commits suicide. They're not a threat to everyone else. They're a threat to themselves. I'm talking about the coach that predates on children. I'm talking about the person stealing money out of your cash register. I'm talking about the bully. I'm talking about those are insider threats. They're already there. The kid is already freaking there. There's no, well, that's harder to rally around, Greg. I can't get everyone together and go, well, let's get, we got to start looking at each other. No, Bill would never do that. I know him. Yes, he fucking would. Okay. He absolutely
What did Clinton say? Gosh damn Hillary Clinton. Of all the crappy shit that Hillary Clinton did, when she came out with the book title, It Takes a Village to Raise the Child, stop for a minute and read that title. I don't care if it's a shitty book, and I don't care if you like her or hate her, but listen to what she's saying because it makes a lot of sense, Brian.
Yeah.
If I relegate it to your kid, or I say, hey, my kids are old, I'm not in that school anymore. Do you get what I'm trying to say? I'm out of that. If I just throw money at saving a gosh damn rhino in Africa, I'm never really going to be involved in it. And I'm not saying to stop that, folks. Stop doing the knee jerk. Stop thinking that this is binary. Either I do it or I don't do it. Either I invest in it or I don't invest in it. The idea is, look, medical malpractice is common, Brian. It's killing people like it's free. Okay, so now we're shining a light on it. And guess what? People are trying to pay their way out of it. Is that going to work? No. We're going to have training, and we're going to have lawsuits, and we're going to have legislations. We're going to have a measured 360-degree response to it. And every time I hear that 360, I think of this training at bang all the time, running around with paintballs. Brian, is that how we did pre-deployment training for soldiers, sailors, airmen, and marine, that we're going into the most dangerous places on the planet? Did we just focus on the kinetic? No. Do you remember the first time we did a non-kinetic gosh damn scenario and people came up and go, what am I paying you for? Okay, and we said non-kin's where it's at because you got to know when to pull the trigger. See, that's the problem, Brian, is we're finally addressing. You started off this saying, what's wrong? What are we missing? Well, I'm telling you what we're missing. We're missing that we're thinking that we're addressing the problem. We're addressing the issue with a whole bunch of other issues.
We're addressing a symptom.
A symptom of a bigger, much bigger problem.
We're screaming about the headache and not even
Yep.
paying attention to the tumor that's pushing against their skull. You know
That's
what I mean?
Well, hey, do you know something?
Yeah. Well, so and no, the 360 navigation process is a failed one. So which is what you were referring to before. So some of our listeners.
I'm referring to malfeasance, malpractice, and I'm saying that the good idea fairy needs to be smothered in her crib, because what happens is we have a guy, Brian. Look, let's talk in our next episode about answers and what answers aren't.
Right.
Do you get what I'm trying to say? But I want to make sure that we understand that at every one of these shootings at Oxford and Uvalde and every one that we could go back through, we see the outraged parents and the parents trying to push in, and I want an answer. Listen, you can't wait till the gosh damn artery is burst. You get what I'm trying to say? Because that's then emergency surgery to bring the patient back, and many times they die. Now, in the lull between these horrific incidents, this is when we have to address them. It's easy over the water tank to say, Brian, this is about being bullied. It has nothing to do with being
This is
bullied.
literally the greatest summer is happening. Kids are getting out of school. You now have the clock's ticking. You got 3 months. You got 3 months to prep.
Call us. Call somebody. Do something. Well, because and Brian, you brought up something I want to make sure that we don't miss out on this one. The groupthink. Look, groupthink is not corrective, because the collective sometimes leads nowhere.
Right.
And when we're thinking or making decisions as a group, the problem is that sometimes that discourages creativity and more so individual responsibility. Because as I'm in that hallway with the other cops and none of the other cops are moving, I'm thinking, well, they must know something. Do you get what I'm trying to say? And Brian, we're saying, well, we did a response. Well, what do? Well, first is the IC, and then is this. Look, Brian, sometimes in an emergency situation, you have to have emergency procedures that are so simple everybody does them. Heimlich maneuver saves lives.
Yeah, we can get into that in the next chapter, but I think totally one of the ways I look at our response to these things is I'm sure if anyone listening, I know you don't have one, but your dog's sitting right now, Greg. So this is a dog analogy. So my dog, just like probably most people who are listening, it can't stand the vacuum cleaner. Like, hates it. It's the worst. Like, every single time, no matter how many, I've been a dog for years, right? She tries to attack the vacuum cleaner when I'm vacuuming. So we have one of those vacuum cleaners, and when it's sitting against the wall in plain view, sitting there, dog does not care, doesn't go near it, doesn't sniff it, doesn't care about it, doesn't alert to it, doesn't have a care in the world. When does she go crazy? When the vacuum cleaner goes on, right? So the vacuum cleaner goes on, she goes completely nuts, she attacks it, I turn it off, I set it against the wall, doesn't have a care for it at all. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're a bunch of fucking dogs barking at a fucking vacuum cleaner. I mean, that's it.
And the longer it goes from the vacuum cleaner being shut down, we take a powder until the next vacuum cleaner turns on.
So I think that's a good place to wrap on this chapter of why we think we get things wrong or what this happens and
how we get it wrong. And Brian, when we come back, let's talk about the role of training in mitigation.
Perfect. Okay, let's do that on chapter 3. Thanks everyone for listening.
See you soon.
Okay, Greg, for our kind of third chapter here, we talked about how and why these school shootings happen, how and why we kind of get things wrong. We explained a lot of that. And then now I think most importantly, this so what? How do we get it right? Yeah. What's the solution here, right? What's the role of training and all this? So obviously for everyone listening, we take things from a training perspective. You can train your way out of just about any a really hard situation, at least anyone that I've seen. So we always look at this as a solution, not something that's, and of course we have different definitions for training and education than what most people have. But we talk about training changes behavior, and so if you want to change behavior, you can't just educate your way out of this. You can't read a book, you can't read a news article, and then write your congressman and be done with it. Like, you have to actually change behavior.
Totally.
So we're going to get into that. So let's start with safety and security. Let's literally define those. Can you define those terms for us,
Yeah.
Greg?
So let's do, and the reason we should do that, Brian, let's get a quick street definition so everybody understands what we're talking about
Okay.
bringing to a school. A school already is supposed to be a place where kids feel safe. So safety is that state of being protected, or the state of feeling that it's unlikely that I'm going to ever have danger, risk, or injury. Okay, so that's a place. Now, look, that should extend to the lunchroom, to the playground. You get what I'm trying to say? To the parking lot. Why do schools invest so much time in dropping off and picking up? I know that you're dropping off and picking up the insurgent.
Get me
Talk
started.
about the chaos there, right?
Yeah.
So what is safety? Safety is to address the danger, risk, and injury from a measured response well before the school opens, right?
Yeah.
And
you're
so,
talking about even to encompassing in that is literally like psychological and emotional safety. Like, I need to feel
absolutely.
that I'm comfortable and safe in this environment, literally just for learning to occur. Right? We're
I
not even
was
talking about school shootings. We're talking about just for learning to occur.
Brian, I was on the safety patrol at every school that when I all the way to Canton. I did Pleasant View Elementary School, if anybody knows that, in East Detroit. And then by the time I got to Canton, I was actually a sergeant in the safety patrol, and your badge was a different color. But I wanted to be the lieutenant, and then there was a captain. I didn't understand all of those things. I just knew the badge looked pretty cool, right? But what were we there for, Brian? We were there for the little things. We were there to make sure that the kids cross safely. We were make sure that look, kids had the happy head all the time. So kids can't be aware and alert of their surroundings the entire time, because that's not in their DNA. We have to protect them. Why do we use car seats, Brian? We use car seats because they're fragile little snowflakes and we don't want them to get crushed, right? So that's a good, I think, street definition of safety.
Okay, then let's jump right ahead into security then.
Yeah, so security is being free from danger or threat, but it's actually a step. So it's a thing that we have to do. So, for example, there's real security and the semblance of security. Let me give you an example. Locking a door, okay? Having a light on so when you don't trip in the dark. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Having a fire alarm. Now, the difference between that and safety is these are actual tangible steps that somebody takes. You know that child thing that you put on the stairs so a little kid doesn't crawl down the stairs, a latch that you put under the sink. So somebody would say, well, that's safety. No. The safety is a state of being, a state of feeling. Security is the steps you get there, how I get them there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. So let's just jump right in, because we're talking about physical locations. What does that mean for like physical security?
Yeah.
I mean,
so look, physical security is the simplest one of these, Brian, and many companies make billions of dollars every year on doing that. So, for example, a physical security measure on your boat would be a bumper that you throw over your boat as you're approaching the dock, so you don't crash your boat and kill a bunch of people. It would also be having bullet-resistant windows or blast shields if you were living in a place where there may be a car bomb or a suicide bomber. So now what you've taken is you've taken from the idea of being safe and secure, danger, risk, and injury, to actually taking tangible steps to reduce the danger, risk, and injury. And then the physical security would be harding a target so that target's no longer palatable to a terrorist or a criminal or an insurgent. Does that make sense?
yeah,
So I want them to go somewhere other than my bank or my house, because the physical security is actually enhanced.
oh, okay. And so, when we look at things, obviously we look at it from a human behavior perspective, and we provide a think with a K, not a thing with a G. We'd
Yeah.
rather up armor your brain than up armor your house or place of business. We think it's just a more effective strategy.
Yes.
But when we get into this and when we talk about training is, we use the terms, at bang, right of bang, left of bang, and what this means. And it sounds just topically saying those things like, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. You want to be left of bang. You want to mitigate something before it happens. But actually doing that is a lot more complicated than people think, or it's seemingly they'll say, hey, we're trying to mitigate this, so we put up cameras. It's like, well, now you have a really good recording of the homicide that's about to happen. That's
Yes.
an at bang thing that may not even stop it. It just may only be great for subsequent prosecution. Well, that doesn't help you, right? That's not going
Right.
to prevent the situation from happening. And what a lot of these folks are doing, a lot of these companies out there, and I'm not saying it's not necessary, but here's an app when this happens. Hey, we're going to up armor the school. We're going to put the glass up. We're going to have the balustrades. We're going to do this. We're going to have an armed veteran from the neighborhood who's volunteering to come here. And so that is all at bang thinking. What you're saying when you when you look at that as a solution is you're saying, I'm accepting the fact that this is going to happen, and we're going to do our best to mitigate it when it does. That's fucking bullshit, and that is an absolutely unacceptable standard. That is a completely unacceptable standard for a school. Completely, right? You're looking at it, well, this is going to happen. Let's react to it. You're just saying, hey, I want to be better at reacting to this incident. And I'm saying, F you, man. That's not good enough. That's not where your head should at be.
So,
And
so, so, so add that. It would be here, Brian. Look, I hear this all the time. The veterans in the school hallways with the guns, hire more security. Look, folks, read your own headlines. We're going to be sleeping with the students. We're going to be accidentally shooting the students. We're going to be doing, look, you got to have trained people. If you don't have trained people for the specific event, then you're going to get injured. I saw a parent, Brian, that felt so frustrated after Uvalde that they went to their kid's school and stood out in the parking lot of their kid's school every day until their kid graduated. They felt that they were doing something. But, Brian, that was the semblance of security. That's
yes,
one, unsustainable, and two, it's scattershot. So the firemen, standing out in front of the school waiting for the fire. Brian,
well,
that's equally unsustainable.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the fire analogy is brought up, which is also brought up for like why we do have kids do active shooter drills, and people say, well, it's just like a fire drill. Okay, you're completely getting that analogy wrong. And here's why. It goes right into what I said of at bang, right of bang, left of bang, what that means. You don't hire a fireman to stand outside your school
Right.
and jump into action when there's a fire. You know why? You don't have to. Do you know why you don't have to? Because everything for fire prevention is literally built into the code of the building, down to how it's actually constructed, what the specific materials are. There's a standard that they have to be rated to. Because why? Because not long ago, a whole bunch of kids died in fires at schools. So we had to
It's
learn, oh
commonplace.
wow, this is not the way to do things.
Right.
And then we had to build it literally into everything that we do, to include the fire drill is at bang thinking. It's the last ditch effort. That's what the fire drill is. It's the code that the building is built into. It's the fire marshal who has to sign off on it. It's the firemen who come and inspect the fire extinguishers, who test the alarm when you're in school, when you're out of school. That's what
Absolutely.
it is. That's prevention. All right. That's how they go around and educate people. Hey, you got to have this ventilation over here because you have flammable liquids. That's what we're talking about. I mean, Ben Franklin, when he said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, was literally talking about fires. He was talking about chimney sweeps, cleaning out your chimney so
Yes.
that your house didn't burn down. So
So listen. Why is this different than? Look, in a last episode we talked about how do we miss it so egregiously. I will tell you this, Brian. During COVID, and COVID's not over, folks, but during the primary 18 months of the worst of COVID, we had to do a lot of travel, no matter that other people weren't traveling. And you know what screwed people the most, Brian? What screwed people were elevators. Why? Because they didn't know how to
yeah,
act on an
yep,
elevator. Elevator tells you everything. Minimum number of people. Here's the emergency button. This is open. This is closed. It tells you everything. And last time it was inspected, right?
yep.
But now all of a sudden you got on the elevator and there was another person there. So they actually had to put footprints, because guess what? Elevators aren't always 6 feet apart. Okay, so you were violating protocols. And again, what we're talking about is a presumed capability, okay, that we took shortcuts on. And that's what we're doing with school shootings. You're just talking about it. You're talking about that with fire safety. Fires killed a lot of kids. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So we said we don't anymore want that. So we developed technology and training and education to be commensurate with it. So we had a true capability rather than a presumed capability.
So that's a good term for us to define a presumed capability, because it's exactly what you saw, especially this most recent shooting in Uvalde. But a presumed capability is worse than no capability, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I figured you'd agree with that. But what we mean by this is, the teachers and staff had their Alice training before the Oxford school shooting. I think it was 9 or 10 days prior, I believe, if I read that correctly.
And not sure if they call it Alice training, but the idea is that everybody knows what Alice training, school shooter safety training is.
School shooter safety training.
Yep.
The police officers responding to the one at Rob's school was what? They had just been checked off recently. Yeah, we did this drills. We're certified. We did our active shooter response training. We're good.
It's even on the Facebook post.
So what happens is these things get so they get so watered down to some click through bullshit e-learning online crap, and that a lot of it actually has gotten better in terms of what the content is there. It just,
I'll agree.
Everyone's just clicking through it, and there's no actual training involved. One, that's education, that's not training. One, that's education, not training. Remember that. And two, it's ineffective. We've seen this. Okay, this is ineffective. So that's what happens when you have this presumed capability. Hey, we got this. We're good. That's more dangerous than not having that capability at all, because now you think you know what you're doing. So when the situation occurs, you're completely lost. At least if you didn't know what to do, you'd more likely to think of something on the spot, right, than having this presumed capability. And it's very dangerous, and that's what happens with the the cameras and the security guard. And it's like, do you know anything about that person? Do you know what their training is? Do you know what the protocols and procedures are? Do the parents and the kids and the teachers, all the school know? Do they have weekly meetings about this and what kids have been talking about? Like that's what we're talking about, right? And that's left of bang. All of this other stuff that you're seeing, it's just it doesn't prevent this from occurring. It might limit the amount of people killed. Once again, that's a completely,
if that's your goal, if that is your desired end state, Brian, and you achieve that at least is something.
If you're in the U.S. military, that's a typical desired end state, meaning that's the best we can do because we're going into combat, so we're going to mitigate these potential losses as best as we can, but we know there's acceptable risk in there.
Yep.
This is not the military we're talking about. This is a fucking school. Okay. The zero. It should be any more than 0 kids killed is a complete and catastrophic and total failure. I mean, that should be the standard, but we don't do that. So how do we get there, Greg?
Here's the thing: we got to stop. We got to stop saying things that aren't patently true to get through the event emotionally. For example, we talk about school shootings being a phenomenon. The problem with the term is that these are situations that are predictable, preventable, and explainable. They're explicable, so therefore they can't be a phenomenon. They're a thing that has both symptoms. There's a proximate cause behind it. There's an op tempo that goes along with them. Therefore, if it can be studied and if it's repeatable, Brian, then we can bring to bear a training solution. Next thing, the people, it's an epidemic. It's at epidemic proportions. Okay, that means a widespread occurrence that's time sensitive. Look, these are rare and random. And just like you said, if you went to a person for insurance, Brian, because it's almost never happens, and it may never have happened in a school, and may never happen in many, many schools, but then all of a sudden you get that peak that's in the center. So you're saying that you want me to spend all my time preventing for that peak. Your correlation between the fire and school shooters is exactly correct. We have to deem that it is so important that we don't stop until we get it right. And Brian, the people are going to say, yeah, but you're talking out both ends of your mouth. You're saying that you don't want more intervention, but you have to have a fire marshal that comes in and inspects, and you have to have the fireman that comes in and shakes the fire extinguishers. What we're saying is a measured response takes into consideration before bang, at bang, just after bang, and left of the next bang. And if you don't think in those terms, Brian, because listen, Just because you've stopped one school shooter doesn't mean that you're out of the woods. You get what I'm trying to say?
Well,
You've got
yeah,
all those kids that are going through that system that are facing the same types of dilemmas. So the education process has to parallel the training process as well. You said something, and I believe it was our first episode when you were talking about the information. Okay, so first of all, there's a difference between information and intelligence.
right,
So Brian talked about unverified, unevaluated raw data. When he said, we're all sitting in the teacher's lounge and somebody goes, hey,
right.
anybody notice Bobby Sue or Billy or whatever it was? The idea is that's information. Now, what we got to do to that is we got to vet it. We've got to work it. We've got to process it and evaluate it, Brian, till it becomes intelligence. Why am I saying that? Because without raw data, without information, we'll never have intelligence. What do I mean by that? We can't develop a training plan on all other school shootings. We have to come in and see at what level. Are you urban? Are you rural? What are the ages of the children? What is the physical layout of the buildings? You get what I'm saying? There's no one size fits all. And we got to get the community involved, and we got to get the clergy involved. We got to get the hospital involved. Everybody has to have a stake in the matter.
Yeah, and part of why we give a training solution to everything, because obviously training should develop some, skills, attitudes, aptitudes, abilities, knowledge, right? That's what
Yep.
it's there for. But the end state of what it really does is it gives you a level, well, it should, if it's good training, gives you a level of
Yes.
competence. And if I'm more competent in something like this, the more confidence I have to report something, to say something, because I know there's people listening right now that are like, we report this all the time. We say this and nothing ever happens. Nothing ever happens. Like, that's going on everywhere, whether that's in an ER nurse reporting someone who's starting to become an unruly patient before they actually explode, or
Yep.
whether that's a teacher or school psychologist saying, hey, and there's this follow-up is just, well, we'll just kind of kick the can down the road, which it is not actually illogical, because if you were to say, if we can get every single person who's ever shot up a school, if we can get them past the age of 21, they're probably going to be okay, or probably it's unlikely that it's a lot less likely that they're going to ever engage in some violent act like that, right? But that's across the board. The older you are, the less aggressive, the less behavior you engage in that's could be even just unsafe, right? You're
Yes.
less likely to speed in your 30s than you are when you're 16.
Security, exactly.
So that part of that reason, and we don't attribute value to these things, because again, even though we see this every day or every week, there's something like this, it's very hard when I see that on the news, Greg, to go, yeah, but what are the chances? I mean, you guys even said it. What are the chances of it happening here? You're right. It's slim.
Very low.
Like it's pretty low. However,
Yep.
it has to be one of the most important things you address, because the whole safety and security thing, just like you define, man, if I focus just on that, well, my learning is going to get better, because why? Students are literally going to feel and be more comfortable, because they're going to be more safe and secure. So it doesn't just have to be this, we're gonna solve the problem of school shootings. It's
Yes.
No, we're gonna solve the problem of broken human beings lashing out. Well, how do we solve the problem of broken human beings lashing out? Well, everything we've been talking about is how you solve those problems. I have to address it far sooner.
So what I hear, first of all, violence agreement again. I hate to use the word violent, but it sums it up so quickly. I read to you a couple of days ago the gosh damn pundits that just continue, like, I don't even want to talk about the live action SMEs on talking about
So
their state.
bad.
It's horrible. But the one comment was, this is about prevention, not prediction. Look, you're getting prediction wrong. Okay, if you're doing a statistical analysis and adding zeros and ones and tracking that child through their entire life, that's a different type of prediction. We do predictive analysis every day. And the predictive analysis is if you've got that sharp thing sticking out. For example, predictive analysis, Brian, if you use a pair of scissors to cut open a box by holding the scissors and dragging them across the tape towards your body, you have a high likelihood of cutting your hand or stabbing yourself, okay? So predictive analysis would be, there's a box cutting tool that's specifically designed for that. Hey, invest in it. Guess what? You'll have both safety and the security and knowing that you're not going to have your kid fumble around with it. So what we do is predictive analysis. We take a look at the set of circumstances and we say this has a higher likelihood of causing danger, death, or injury than this does. So here is where you need to put the best bang for your buck. This is where you really need to invest it. That means that we don't have to look. Brian, having a scan and a key card did nothing to dissuade Adam Lanza from shooting up Sandy Hook.
Right.
Do you see what I'm trying to say? Having the semblance of security is more harmful. Look, is it a fact that if I put a sign out in my yard saying that I've got a pit bull, or if I've got an alarm system, or I have a 30-06, is that going to stop some people? Yeah. But a person that's mission focused, that you're their intended target, it's not going to slow them down.
Not this
not
threat.
a bit.
So yeah, if you're planning for home burglary and trying to prevent that, sure, the ADT sign on the lawn is gonna it will work. It will work. Someone's gonna go, I'm just gonna go try somewhere else, right? But that's obviously, not the type of threat we're talking about. And again, this goes back to part of why we talked about in the last chapter, but of this solution of training is not about getting a bunch of people that we need to go hire and put out here. Stop doing that. I would rather have the 1,000 or 1,500 kids that go to that school with just a little bit of understanding of how this works, and then the 100 and so teachers, principals, administrators, counselors, coaches, that adults, parents that volunteer their time. Make them understand how to do this. You can teach people, here's are the indicators that we need to look out for. Here's how to look for these things in our environment, and then let's act rapidly. And you know what happens if you get a false positive, Greg? What if you find out the kid just
listen? So we've been teaching this for how long? I go into a room, and after we're teaching the soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine, first responders, coppers, family members, church, or anything else, I say I would rather come into this room and say, sir, I apologize. We patted you down and opened your bag because we thought that you might have been a school shooter and it was for the betterment of our safety and security protocol, than to come in and go, ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that Lance Corporal so-and-so got blown the fuck up because he didn't understand what an IED or a VBID or a sniper ambush was, Brian. And that's the problem. The problem is that I get emotionally tense. You get emotionally tense. You know why? Because it's like we're yelling into a void and we don't even hear the echo back. Do you know how frustrating that gets when we talk to people? And I hear this, it came out of nowhere. Okay, nothing comes out of nowhere.
Nothing comes out of nowhere.
There's nothing we could have done. We could have never predicted this. And then for the next 3 weeks, we have a litany of I was violent at any speed. We always was. He had a fascination with everything. We got to stop fooling ourselves, Brian. So we have to make sure that we channel our fear and our anger into something that'll be better for the tribe. Because if we don't, then all we're going to do is we're going to invest in the next incident. Then we're going to emotionally be bereft. And then it's going to be another month, a week, a year, and it's going to be the next incident. And people think it's overwhelming because now yesterday we had Oklahoma had a shooting at their ER, and the week before we had a shooting at a bodega, and the week before that. Look, shootings aren't going to go away, especially when you got people that are frustrated, and there's economic issues and all these other proximate factors that are going on. So situation awareness alone is not enough. Situation awareness means have your head on a swivel. But look, these people come from somewhere. They had to buy these weapons. They had to transport this ammunition. They had to drag the bag from their car into the building.
They had to make a plan. They had to write it down.
Draft a plan,
they had to
talk about a plan.
They had to look
interviews.
about it. And you can't. People can't shut up today. No one shuts up, especially the younger you are. That's great. It's the easiest thing. It's all out there. We just don't listen anymore. We don't. Well, I want to turn this. Well, things are different back in my. It's all the same stuff. We don't take the time to truly go, what are we really trying to do here? What's optimal inside of a school? Is it that they're far enough along in algebra that they score high enough on a standardized test so that the state can continue giving us the amount of funding? Is that what the goal is? Because that's a pretty shitty goal. I mean, that's just a self-licking ice cream cone. All you're doing is just fulfilling the next thing, and then we do it again and we do it again. What are you actually preparing that child for? What are we really doing here? Is there safety and security the utmost important to us? Because it's clearly not, by the way we're handling things. And we get, like you said, people get angry. They have the right to be angry. We get frustrated, which leads to anger, because it's one of my go-to emotions. And the idea is just because it's such a solvable problem. It is such a solvable problem
That's why we get upset, Brian.
that
You nailed it.
if this was the asteroid getting blown by a solar flare off course to now veer straight at planet Earth, which don't really have a lot of solutions for that one. You know what I mean?
Right.
This is such it's I don't know. They're
This
complicated,
is
but they're not complex.
this is
There's very little complexity in here.
You're exactly right, and it's not binary, but it isn't so complex that we can't address it. And we talk about in a clear light of day. Chantel, great quote by the way. We talk about dragging things out and taking a look at them, and we talk about having an unemotional response. This is one of the few times that I say you have to have emotions. Why? Because when you talk about compassion and sympathy for the people that are dead and Uvalde and all school shootings and all racially motivated attacks and all this horrible stuff, compassion and sympathy are great. They're emotional reactions to the suffering of others, okay? But what we have to do, Brian, is we have to talk about training is essential because of empathy. Empathy allows us to recognize the emotional baggage of somebody else, but then actually step in and feel some of that. Why? Because if I can't take the perspective of another, there's no way I'll ever understand what that feels like. I've got to come up and say, what's on your heart? I've got to come up when you're broken and go, look, I understand you're hurting, but you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else if I don't get you help. That's something that we don't do as a nation. We've lost the ability to take a look at the other members in the cave by the firelight and say, it looks like so-and-so's teeth aren't good enough. Maybe I'll chip in and chew the rabbit for them. You get it? That empathy is essential in this type of response.
And I think what you were just talking about, what we have been addressing, those these are low calorie local solutions, meaning
yes,
you just talked about, hey, we got to have a conversation, we need to have empathy for the people in our community. Like, that doesn't cost billions of taxpayer dollars.
And
that
it doesn't take a lot of your time either.
Doesn't cost
right?
a lot of your time. It doesn't take this is what we're saying, is that stop this. You are the solution. If you're listening to this, you're the solution.
You're exactly right, Brian. We stood in a gym. It was one of the nicest gyms that I ever. We did the Jewish church and synagogue school. Then we went over to that school. Then we did something else. Not going to get any more detailed than that. And we were standing in there. And I want to ask you a question. What level of safety and security am I willing to invest in when, while we were standing there briefing all those parents in that gym, we looked around and saw all of the sports teams and all of the investments that were going into the sports
all the sponsors.
Teams. And okay, listen, if you're going to sponsor the kids at a sports team, which is essential, don't stop that, because group skills are where we skin our knees and where we learn empathy, right, Brian. But what I'm trying to say is, are you willing to invest the same amount of money in the safety and security of the personnel at your school, including teachers, because teachers are always killed in these events as well? And the answer is no, we're not. In most instances that we've investigated, you and I personally, that we have a personal stake in, we saw that there was a marked difference between what they were investing in and supporting in their extracurricular activities and some of the showier things at their school or church than what we saw when it came down to their safety and security. You can't relegate. A camera stops nothing. A camera reduces the risk of nothing.
What are you talking about? Go to London. There's cameras every foot and every 18 inches on every wall on every street corner. So there's no crime there, Greg.
Yeah, they've solved everything.
Solved it. Cracked the code.
No, and I'm with you on this. And Brian, I think your assessment of saying that training has to start to the farthest left. Look, there's two continuums. There's a continuum for left of bang, at bang, right of bang thinking, and there's a whole bunch of different diversions or calculations that are to be done left and right, and people are misusing the model that we built over and over. But there's also an up and down scale, the baseline. There's things that happen above a baseline or below a baseline, and those are critically important. So even if you attended a short duration training that it talked about baselines and anomalies and incongruent signals, Brian, and talked about a left of bang to a left of the next bang response, even that alone, which you could do in perhaps a morning, you know what I'm saying, to a whole bunch of parents and everybody, that school system would be better off than what we're seeing the training that they're investing in.
No, I think that's a good point. It kind of goes back to what we brought up in that first one about everyone sort of picks their point that they're
Yep.
comfortable with or have some little knowledge of, and that's where it is. If I look at this in situation in Robb Elementary School, what everyone does is says, okay, well, if the police would have went in sooner right away, less kids would have died. And then the next person comes along and goes, well, no, if you had better people at the front door, he never would have got in. Well, no, if
Yep.
we would have known this here at the car accident, then we could have stopped it there. Then we
And
could
my
have like,
division doesn't have
we'll keep,
a hostage
but what I'm
negotiator. And
saying
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah, yeah.
everyone picks their spot
Yep. Of course they
where
do, because they're
you,
most
so,
familiar there.
but keep going on that. Like if
Yep.
this kid had a better upbringing, would that have mitigated this? Yeah, likely it would have.
Yep.
I'm sorry, that's what the data reflects. You know what I'm
Yep.
saying? So it's we pick a spot, and that's where everyone goes. And we're saying that the farther left on that timeline you go,
Yep.
the greater the impact over time on that individual's life. And if you look at it this way, I would say if I'm sitting here listening to this go and I want to solve the problem of school shootings, you have to give yourself a realistic timeline and say, okay, can we stop these in 10 years? I think so. I think you could be done even faster. I mean, literally almost get it down to where it's all over the news because for the week, because it's the first time in a year it's happened. Could you do
Yeah.
that in 10 years? Probably.
Yep.
I mean, what I'm saying is you have to take a long-term view of this and go,
Just like automotive safety,
how am I going to, how am I going to
airbags,
fix
just
this?
like any windshields that don't explode and kill the driver.
Yeah. So I know we covered a lot, and I did want to hit just one point at the end of this one before we kind of wrap on it is you mentioned it right in when we were talking on this one, and I wrote it down, and you said we were there to pick up on the little things, and you know what?
Yes.
That's what it is. That's what we're talking about it is the little things that matter. It's not the big ones, right?
You're
It's
exactly
it's
right.
because it's the little ones you can have an impact on. It's the little ones you can change. It's the little ones you can have a fix, and a lot of little things add up to
Yeah.
a really, really big change.
So let me give you a thing, Brian. If you haven't been at our training, folks, and then hold your tongue, hold that mouth, my mom would say, because you can't compare it if you don't know what it is and you haven't looked this up. So if you think that we're out there being boisterous, we're not trying to be. We're trying to tell you that sometimes a radically different solution can be the one that you're looking for. You just haven't found it yet. So, Brian, can you imagine the power of us going into a place, and I'm going to give you both sides of the coin, us going into a place for a week and saying, okay, we're going to do a morning session, an afternoon session, an evening session. That way nobody can say, hey, listen, I got to work. I can't be there. I got to drop off the kids. I got to, can't get a babysitter. Because why? Because we say, okay, we'll do this, and you have to do your part. And guess what? There's always an excuse why I can't do my part, Brian. Why I can't just show up. Why I can't just answer the question. So then we bring a litany of experts that we work with daily, weekly, monthly, that talk about compassion and sympathy and empathy and help us rein in our emotions. Then we bring other people that talk about physical security and explain what the art of the possible is. And then we bring in subject matter experts that talk about how you create your own program so it's unique to you and addresses your challenges, Brian. And all the time, you and I are giving classes sporadically through that day. Sporadicus, I saw that movie. And all the way through that, so the parents and the teachers and the students are educating themselves. And we say, okay, Brian, we're putting on that seminar. It's going to be a week long, Monday through Friday. And it's going to be long days because we have to make sure that we, mix it up so everybody avails themselves of all these experts that we're going to bring in. And you know what we get? We never get a thing about the money. We get a thing about the time. We don't have the time. We don't have the time. We don't have, well, you're going to take school time off for funerals, Brian. And so I hate to be that blunt, but I'm sick and tired of talking to your people and your people go, well, I understand all of that, but, we're just not going to be able to invest the time.
Yeah.
So don't call us if you're not willing to invest the time. And is it going to be expensive? Look, you pay for our time. We know what we're doing. We're going to come in. We're going to be efficient. We're not going to waste your time. But there's training that's out there. Look, if you want nothing but at-bang training, Brian and I are not saying there's something wrong with that. We're saying that just pick where you're going to invest.
Just go on LinkedIn and find the person who's sharing the Uvalde shooting, promoting their own fucking business, and go hire them.
Over and over and over. That's
go
brilliant.
hire them.
You know what I'm saying?
They're not talking about the issue. They're just saying, Yeah,
Yeah,
hire
and you
me.
know what? I sent you a couple of those photos, Brian, where they're showing the photo and they're going, "This could be you. So buy my
Yeah,
book. This could be you. Tune into our thing. Hey, kiss my ass.
fear
Everything that we
mongering.
do on this is
They're
free. You got it, and we're not going to stir the pot like that. And if you want us to come to your school and do an approach like we're talking about, is it going to cost you some money? Yeah, but it's not going to cost as much as you spent on your football team last year or any of the other things. And you know the
yeah.
difference, Brian? You're going to see a tangible result. Why? Because we use that tagline over and over, but training changes behavior. It changes how you think. And if we can improve your critical thinking during an event, imagine how powerful it would be if we could improve your critical thinking before an event happened, Brian. That's when you're going to be closing and latching doors. That's when you're going to be changing the 9-volt battery in your smoke alarm. That's when you're going to be checking your engine oil before the gosh damn warning light comes on. And that's what we're talking about. Predictive analysis, Brian, those preventative steps before an event occur that can save a life.
Well, I think that's a good place to end on. Just
Sorry, we're
to
so passionate.
talk about what we do here at the end for the last couple of minutes. But at least, for us, we spent an hour and a half or 2 hours talking about the topic first, and then 2 minutes about how we address it. So I see the exact opposite out of most companies and people out there, but whatever, to each his own or her own or their own or whatever.
Shelley would say karma's a bitch.
It
Right?
is. It definitely is.
You reap what you
Well,
sow.
well, we appreciate everyone for listening. You can always reach out to us at leftofgreg@gmail.com if you want to get a hold of us. We have more on the Patreon side as well for those folks who help support the podcast, where we even dive deep on some of these concepts or give examples or little tutorials. Hopefully maybe it stirs some conversation. Share it with a friend if you enjoyed it. Write us and tell us how much we sucked or how much you agreed with it. I read and respond to every email that someone sends. So thanks everyone for tuning in. And don't forget that training changes behavior.